Chronicles of Narnia, The Silver Chair by C.S. Lewis. Chapter 6 The Wild Wastelands of the North. At about 9 o'clock the next morning, 3 lonely figures might have been picking their way across the Shribble by the shoals and stepping stones. It was a shallow, noisy stream, and even Jill was not wet above her knees when they reached the northern bank. About 50 yards ahead, the land rose up to the beginning of the moor, everywhere steeply and often in cliffs. "I suppose that's our way," said Scrub, pointing left and west to where a stream flowed down from the moor through a shallow gorge. But the Marshwiggle shook his head. "The giants mainly live along the side of that gorge," he said. "You might say the gorge was like a street to them. We'll do better straight ahead, even though it's a bit steep." They found a place where they could scramble up, and in about 10 minutes they stood panting at the top. They cast a long look at the valley land of Narnia, and then turned their faces to the north. The vast, lonely moor stretched up and on as far as they could see. On their left was rockier ground. Jill thought that it must be the edge of the Giant's Gorge, and did not much care about looking in that direction. They set out. It was a good springy ground for walking, and a day of pale winter sunlight. As they got deeper into the moor, the loneliness increased. One could hear peewits and see an occasional hawk. When they halted in the middle of the morning for a rest and a drink in a little hollow by a stream, Jill was beginning to feel that she might enjoy adventures after all, and said so. "We haven't had any yet," said the Marshwiggle. Walks after the first halt, like school mornings after break or railway journeys after changing trains, never go on as they were before. When they set out again, Jill noticed that the rocky edge of the gorge had drawn nearer, and as the rocks were less flat, more upright than they had been. In fact, they were like towers of rock, and what funny shapes they were! "I do believe," thought Jill, "that all the stories about giants might have come from those funny rocks. If you were coming along here and it was half dark, you could easily think those piles of rocks were giants. Look at one now. You could almost imagine that the lump on top was a head. It would be rather too big for the body, but it would do well enough for an ugly giant. And all the bushy stuff, I suppose it's heather and bird's nest, would do really well for a hair and beard. And the things sticking out on each side were quite like ears. They'd be horribly big, but then I dare say giants would have big ears like elephants. And whoo!" Her blood froze. The thing moved. It was a real giant. There was no mistaking it. She had seen it turn its head. She had caught a glimpse of the great, stupid, puff-cheeked face. All the things were giants, not rocks. There were about 40 or 50 of them, all in a row, obviously standing with their feet on the bottom of the gorge and their elbows resting on the edge of the gorge, just as men might stand leaning on a wall, lazy men, on a fine morning after breakfast. "Keep straight on," whispered Puddlegum, who had noticed them too. "Don't look at them, and whatever you do, don't run. They'd be after us in a moment." So they kept on, pretending not to have seen the giants. It was like walking past the gate of a house where there is a fierce dog, only far worse. There were dozens and dozens of these giants. They didn't look angry or kind or interested at all. There was no sign that they had seen the travellers. Then, whiz, 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 some heavy object came hurling through the air, and with a crash a big boulder fell about 20 paces ahead of them. And then, thud, fell another 20 feet behind. "Are they aiming at us?" asked Scrub. "No," said Puddlegum. "It would be a good deal safer if they were. They're trying to hit that kitten over there, to be right. They won't hit it, you know. It's safe enough. They're such very bad shots. They play cock-shies most fine mornings. About the only game where they're clever enough to understand." It was a horrible time. There seemed to end no line of giants, and they never ceased hurling stones, some of which fell extremely close. Quite apart from real danger, the very sight and sound of their faces and voices were enough to scare anyone. Joel tried not to look at them. After about 25 minutes, the giants apparently had a quarrel. This put an end to the cockshies, but it was not pleasant to be within a mile of quarrelling giants. They stormed and jeered at one another in long, meaningless words of about 20 syllables each. They foamed and gibbered and jumped in their rage, and each jump shook the earth like a bomb. They lammered each other on the head with great clumsy stone hammers, but their skulls were so hard that the hammers bounced off again, and the monster who had given the blow would drop his hammer and howl in pain because it had stung his fingers. But he was so stupid that the same thing exactly a minute later. This is a good thing in the long run, for by the end of an hour all the giants were so hurt that they sat down and began to cry. When they sat down, their heads were below the edge of the gorge, so that you saw them no more. But Joel could hear them howling and blubbering and boo-hooing like great babies, even after the place was a mile behind. That night they lay down on the bare floor, and Puddlegum showed the children how to make the best of their blankets by sleeping back to back. The backs keep each other warm, and you can then have both blankets on top. But it was chilly even so, and the ground was hard and lumpy. The marsh weagle told them they would feel more comfortable if only they thought how very much colder it would be later on and farther north, but this didn't cheer them up at all. They travelled across Ettansmuir for many days, saving the bacon and living chiefly on the moorfowl. They were not, of course, talking birds, which Eustace and the weagle shot. Joel rather envied Eustace for being able to shoot. He had learned it in its voyage with King Caspian. As there were countless streams on the moor, they were never short of water. Joel thought that when, in books, people live on what they shoot, it never tells you what a long, smelly, and messy job it is plucking and cleaning dead birds, and how cold it makes your fingers. But the great thing was that they hardly met any giants. One giant saw them, but he only roared with laughter and stumped away about his own business. About the 10th day, they reached a place where the country changed. Sorry about that. They came to the northern edge of the moor and looked down a long, steep slope into a different, grimmer land. At the bottom of the slope there were cliffs. Beyond these, a country of high mountains, dark precipices, stony valleys, ravines so deep and narrow that one could not see far into them, and rivers that poured out of echoing gorges to plunge subtly into black depths. Needless to say, it was Puddlegum who pointed out a sprinkling of snow on the more distant slopes. But there will be more on the north side of them, I shouldn't wonder, he added. It took them some time to reach the foot of the slope, and when they did, they looked down from the top of the cliffs at a river running below them from west to east. It was walled by precipices on the far side as well as on their own, and it was green and sunless, full of rapids and waterfalls. The roar of it shook the earth even where they stood. The bright side of it is, said Puddlegum, that if we were to break our necks getting down the cliff, then we're safe from being drowned in that river. What about that? Said Scrub suddenly, pointing upstream to their left. They all looked and saw the last thing they were expecting. A bridge. And what a bridge, too. It was huge. It was a huge single arch that spawned across the gorge from cliff top to cliff top. And the crown of that arch was high above the cliff tops as the dome of St. Paul's above the street. Why, it must be a giant's bridge, said Joel. Or a sorcerer's, more likely, said Puddlegum. We've got to look out for enchantments in a place like this. I think it's a trap. I think it'll turn into mist and melt away just when we're out in the middle of it. Oh, for goodness sake, don't be such a wet blanket, said Scrub. Why on earth shouldn't it be a proper bridge? Do you think any of the giants we've seen would have the sense to build a thing like that? Said Puddlegum. What might it have been built by other giants? Said Joel. I mean giants who lived hundreds of years ago and were far cleverer than the modern kind. It might have been built by the same ones who built the city we've been looking for. And that would mean we are on the right track, the old bridge leading to the old city. That's a real brainwave, Paul, said Scrub. It must be that. Come on. So they turned and went to the bridge, and when they reached it, it certainly seemed solid enough. The single stones were as big as those at Stonehenge, and must have been squared by good masons once, though now they were cracked and crumbled. The balustrade had apparently been covered with rich carvings, of which some traces remained, mouldering faces and forms of giants, minotaurs, squids, centipedes, and dreadful gods. Puddlegum still didn't trust it, but he consented to cross it with the children. The climb up to the crown of the arch was long and heavy. In many places the great stones had ripped out, leaving horrible gaps through which you looked down on the river foaming thousands of feet below. They saw an eagle fly through under their feet, and the higher they went the colder it grew, and the wind blew so that they could hardly keep their footing. It seemed to shake the bridge. When they reached the top and could look down the slope of the bridge, they saw that it looked like the remains of an ancient giant road stretching away before them into the heart of the mountains. Many stones of its pavement were missing, and there were white patches of grass between those that remained. And riding towards them on that ancient road were two people of normal grown-up human size. Keep on, move towards them, said Puddlegum. Anyone you meet in a place like this is likely as not to be an enemy, but we mustn't let them think that we are afraid." By the time they had stepped off the end of the bridge onto grass, the two strangers were quite close. One was a knight in complete armor with his visor down. His armor and his horse were black, and there was no device on his shield and no banner in his spear. The other was a lady on a white horse, a horse so lovely that you wanted to kiss its nose and give it a lump of sugar at once.